Hello and welcome to the very first Conversations with Cynthia. I'm Cynthia, a historian who grew up multilingual in several countries and then went on to work in several more countries. I've wanted for some time to have a podcast that interviews people who share their own perspectives and experiences about growing up cross-culturally, in the hopes that it would help us see our own stories in new and exciting ways. I'm happy that you're joining me on this journey. Let's now go join Dr. Mathieu Gagnon, our very first guest. Delighted to have you here, Mathieu, our first guest ever on the podcast Conversations with Cynthia is Dr. Mathieu Gagnon, Professor of Psychology at the Royal Military College of Canada. He has a very interesting cross-cultural background, but also his perspective on how that has blended into the rest of his life as an adult is really inspiring. So thank you for being here, Mathieu.
Wow, I sound way more interesting than I think I am. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Cynthia. And it's a delight to be the introductory guest, the first guest. And I look forward to checking out all the other episodes and the other guests as well.
Thank you. Can we just start with your childhood? Some of your thoughts of how you grew up and how this impacted you.
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm kind of a cross-cultural person, and so I had a cross-cultural childhood. There's many ways, of course, to have a cross-cultural childhood or to grow up cross-culturally. Mine was through the fact that my dad was a diplomat for the Canadian Foreign Affairs. So my parents are Canadian. By passport, I'm Canadian. And my dad was a diplomat. And so him and my mother, uh, traveled the world doing postings, diplomatic postings, for a few years before I was born. And I was born in 1977 during one of their postings in Paris, in France. And so from the very beginning, I was moving around because we went from Paris to Rabat, Morocco, and then to Canada, then to Côte d'Ivoire, then to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, then to Switzerland, and then back to Canada, meaning that from the age of 0 to 14, I was constantly moving, switching countries. And I would say, so if you think about, well, how long was I staying in these different countries? It varied. Some were for a year, some were for up to 4 years, and many were for 3 years, actually, which I understand to be a typical kind of diplomatic posting. And so that's the kind of childhood I had of moving around, making friends, losing friends, meeting new cultures, getting to know new ecologies, new countries. You change country. There are different trees, different wildlife, different fruits, different smells, different sounds, different languages. People look different, they dress different, they act different, and you get used to it, and then you move on. And so that's the beauty of this cross-cultural childhood.
Do you have any particular memory that seems to surface more than the others? A
Yeah,
particular place or...
there's so many, but I think that the kind of things that I remember are not so much events that would have happened in the middle of a posting somewhere, but they are the contrasts. The contrasts are what I remember, and this makes a lot of sense from a psychological perspective because a lot of our nervous systems as human beings are particularly attuned to contrast. Contrasts are what matters when things change. And so I really remember particular contrasts. For example, when we went from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which is a tropical country, in which, and during that period, there was a lot of governmental repression of the population, and it was a difficult time. There was a lot of violence. And then we switched to Bern, Switzerland, which is different in terms of difference in terms of the weather, different in terms of what trees you find there, different in terms of also the social fabric and safety. I was able in Switzerland for the first time ever in my life when I was around 11 to actually go outside the house and just go downtown and not be worried about being kidnapped or you know um and so these are kind of big contrasts that you remember, they stay with you. But I still occasionally have these kind of memories that pop up of the warmth of being in Africa, the trees, the this way the air smelled, that kind of heavy air, which is incredibly. I love these memories. They're comforting. They're wonderful. How accurate are they? Is a question that remains up to, because when you're 6, 7 years old, you have memories, but are they really, did that really happen? It's hard to tell. But I do have very fond memories, often of atmospheres, the way the air feel, the way the food tasted, the way there was a particular smell when you would drive through a village and they would be smoking fish, and there was that heavy smoke of smoked fish, and you would roll through it, and that smell. These things stay with you. It's not so much particular stories with people that stay with me as much as feelings, sounds, impressions, smells, and so on.
This is interesting. You're working, or you worked recently on a paper on awe and
Mhm.
nostalgia. And as I'm hearing you describe this, especially going through the village where they're smoking the fish, it made me think of the paper that you are
What
working
I'm
on.
working on. Yeah.
Yeah, on nostalgia. And I wonder if there's any connection, maybe not
Yeah.
even a connection you ever thought of, but between the way that you're looking back at those memories, to me, I feel a connection with the concept
Yes.
of awe and nostalgia.
Well, for sure, there's a lot of nostalgia, because I I wouldn't be surprised if back then, when I went through that plume of fish smoke, my reaction was, "Oh, get me out of here!" But now I think about it going, "Oh, the plume of fish," because and so yeah, I'm studying nostalgia and awe and complex emotions in the cross-cultural child development experience. And for sure, there's a lot of links there when you think about arriving in Switzerland and seeing a vast hill of green grass and the blue sky, and it's quite a very different setting than being downtown in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Not that one is better than the other at all, because in Port-au-Prince, I remember how weird some voodoo ceremonies were that we had witnessed, how interesting that was and how awe-inspiring that was too, and how, full of questions and so on. So there's awe and nostalgia to be found uh, everywhere, but especially in a cross-cultural childhood as well. Without What I don't mean to say is that cross-cultural childhoods are always wonderful. And if you're not in awe or nostalgic of it, you've done it wrong, because that would be wrong as well. There's room for all sorts of experiences there as well.
What would you say is, if you would not mind sharing, one of the more difficult aspects for you of growing up that way?
Yeah. Well, there's always, at every posting, you would lose friends and you would lose what you believe to be your place in the world, right? You didn't, well, and when you're a kid, you don't think about, let's say you arrive somewhere, let's say in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and let's say you start school there, so you're 5, 6 years old, and then 3 years later you leave. When you're leaving, you're like a 9-year old. You don't think, oh, legally speaking, I'm not technically a resident, so it's normal that I have to leave. You think, what? I'm losing. This is where I'm from, right? You don't have that kind of adult cognition of like, I'm only here for a while. You really lose yourself in the story, as you should, because you're a child and you have to make relationships and you have to get to know the world, and so you lose yourself in places. You integrate, and then the pain comes when you have to detach yourself, of course. But I would say probably the one that hurt the most um, uh, was repatriation, which is coming back after having lived in all these different countries, coming back to Canada at 14 years of age because my dad had decided to was looking into retirement basically, and this would indeed be Switzerland would indeed be our last posting, and then we would come back to Canada when I was 14. And it was hard because I left Switzerland, which I loved, and people I loved there as well, but it was also doubly hard because I knew that it was the end of a lifestyle which I thought was mine, which is I thought, oh, I'm always going to be this kind of cross-cultural, having access to many countries and living this way. So, because I have to tell you, there's a when things are well done, let's say, there's a part of excitement there. I mean, it's kind of cool to be, and so when you realize we're done here, I'm actually just a Canadian now, just living in Canada, presumably forever. And no shade to my Canadian friends or Canada. Canada's a wonderful country, but when you compare it to the kind of lifestyle I had at first, there was some grieving there, of course, because it's the end of something that you thought was, well, not that you thought, it's the end of something that you were. It's not that I thought this was my life. It was my life for 14 years, being cross-cultural. And so that was a difficult moment, I'd have to say. But thankfully, with time, you can the pain you can use the pain to do some interesting things as well. And so there's value to pain like this. There's value to these more difficult experiences, should you choose to use it and to look into it, of course.
How did you use the pain?
Yeah, it took me a long time, Cynthia, actually. It took me probably about 35 years to use that pain. For 35 years, I just put it behind me,
Oh,
and just moved on and managed to just, you know, become an adult and become a dad, and I got a PhD in psychology, and just did my life here in Canada with the idea that what was in the past was very much in the past and don't bring it back, and nothing but pain can come out of it anyways, you know. And then at some point, I was in a psychologist's office consulting for issues I have around food, in terms of being either very restrictive or very kind of a compulsive eater. And she asked me about my childhood. And then the floodgates opened. I started crying. And I wasn't crying out of sadness. I was crying because there was too much vastness there for me to speak of. I didn't know how to grasp this enormous childhood that I'd had. This mind-blowingly vast childhood that I had had. How do I even talk about this thing? And how I did it was how my body wanted to talk about it was through tears and just crying, you know. And gradually, a psychologist and I realized that there was more there, that the idea of saying this is in the past and I wanted to stay in the past was no way to honor these experiences, and it was no way as a human to live, because when you're living something that's enormously meaningful and then it cuts, you can pretend all you want that that stuff didn't matter, but that's not true. It matters a lot. And so gradually, so this became a process of reappropriating these experiences and these identities and so on, and then deciding, well, what do I do with this stuff? It's here. I don't just want pain. I want to make something out of this. And so what I did is I decided to devote the rest of my career as a psychology professor, as a researcher, to researching cross-cultural experiences in children. Because at first I was trained originally in facial expression recognition in children, a very kind of niche kind of domain, very interested, but nothing to do with cross-cultural childhood, although one might say the facial expressions are very kind of culturally determined, and that's an interesting bit. But I realized after a while, oh, I'm going to reorient my career to give talks, give workshops, do research, have a podcast on the research about cross-cultural children, and the adults that they become as well. So that's what I made of something. That's how I made something out of it. I decided to use the skill set that I had accumulated while I was denying all of this past. I somehow accumulated a skill set that I was then able to go, wait a minute, I got these incredible skills. And then I have this cross-cultural background that I'm now reappropriating and I need to bring back in my life. I put them together and here we are. And that's the story of me right now.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really positive. From all
Yeah.
of that that came just flooding back, and then you found a way to combine it with everything you'd studied, with
Mhm.
how you're going forwards. I feel
Yeah.
really inspired.
Well, that's great. And look, I'm not a special person. So are there elements of luck in there? Sure. There are absolutely elements of luck. But I think if when you're lucky, you pick things along the way, then gradually you're able to sometimes make something out of a complex experience. And I wouldn't want either. I wouldn't want the listeners to think, well, I wasn't able to make that, so therefore of lesser value, or my experiences are lesser value. No, um, uh, you know, people's lives are people's lives, and but if you want to make something out of these experiences, I think everybody can at least progress on that pathway a little bit. And if I can be helpful to fellow people who grew up cross-culturally and helping them explore how can I make something out of this, then that would be an honor. Because I was helped by my psychologist, not that I would be a psychologist to the people I would help, of course, but it's always wonderful to meet fellow people who grew up that way and see how they've managed to deal with this and what they've done out of it, including you with this podcast, which I'm sure has been informed by your own experiences. You know,
Thank you so much, Mathieu.
thank you, Cynthia.
I'm going to also put, and I realize I forgot to say at the beginning, I'm going to put a link to Mathieu's podcast also down below.
Hmm.
He has a podcast on TCK research, the
Yeah, it's called
latest
the
research
TCK
coming
Research
out.
Podcast. Yep. Yeah. And so every episode about monthly, we interview a person who published a paper, a scientific paper about third culture kids, cross culture kids, expats, and so on. So thank you for having me on, Cynthia, and thank you for plugging the podcast, my podcast as well. And good luck on yours. I'm happy to be the first guest, and I'm very excited to see who comes on next to be able to learn
Thank
about
you.
their own stories. All right. Bye bye.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing so much positive perspective for us to think about.
It's a pleasure. Bye, Cynthia.
Thank you for joining us for the very first Conversations with Cynthia podcast. Do hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of all of our future interviews and posts. There will be new interviews once a month on Friday with shorts posted in between, always on a Friday. Looking forward to seeing you next time.